everyone, and welcome to Community Kitchen at Home Edition. My name is Sherry Beaton and I will be your host today for our episode on baking bread. Today we're going to dispel your fears about baking bread. You're going to see throughout today's instruction that you require very few basic shelf ingredients and very few kitchen tools to produce 2 loaves of lovely white bread. At this point in time, it's important to make sure that your kitchen work area, your countertop, is clear and clean because we will be working with the bread dough on your counter. It's also important to take off your jewelry and make sure you give your hands a good 20-second washing, singing happy birthday. So please take a moment now and pause and go and wash your hands, prepare your countertop and area for working. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you're all set to take a few minutes to prepare your bread dough. Really doesn't take much time. You'll be quite surprised. So the first thing we'll do is review some of the utensils that you're going to need for today's recipe. So, of course, we will be using our oven, not the range top. We're going to be using a large mixing bowl and a good sturdy mixing spoon. We will require 2 loaf pans, some measuring cups, and some measuring spoons. Our ingredients today are also basic shelf ingredients, and it is quite a simple recipe. There are lots of recipes out there and it can be confusing, but today's recipe uses very few ingredients and it is a basic standard white bread recipe. So we're going to be using some yeast, some dry yeast, some sugar, salt, vegetable oil, and flour. If you don't have vegetable oil on hand, you can use melted margarine or melted butter. We'll also be using about 2 cups of warm water. So those are your ingredients. You can use traditional dry yeast, you can use bread machine dry yeast, or the quick rise. It really doesn't matter. They will all work well with the traditional yeast method that we're going to use today. Okay, everyone, it's time to start. So we're going to do the first step of a traditional yeast bread method. I have here 1/2 cup of warm water, about 105 to 115 degrees, but you don't need to take the temperature. Just know that at 105 degrees it feels warm, sort of like a baby's bath. Here I have 4.5 teaspoons of dry yeast. That is equivalent of 2 packages. So if you're using the little packages of yeast, you need 2 of those packages. If you have yeast, bulk yeast in the jar or in a bag, you need 4.5 teaspoons. I have 1 tablespoon of regular white sugar. So the white sugar is going to go into the warm water. We're going to stir that up until it's almost dissolved. And we're going to add the dry yeast. And we'll give that a stir as well. Looks a little messy, but don't worry about that. It's going to be fine. So we're going to give that a little stir. And then we're going to leave that to sit for anywhere from 5 to 8 minutes. What you want to see is your yeast waking up, and you want to see it bubbly and foamy. And the sugar and the warm water is what's going to work with the yeast to bring it to life. And that's what makes a beautiful bread. So we're not going to proceed any further until we know that this yeast is good and that it's going to be foamy in a few minutes. So take a few minutes and we'll come back and check the yeast. So we've left our yeast to come to life and wake up, and when we zoom in here, you can see that this yeast is obviously very fresh and lively and ready to go to work. Okay, I also have another 1.5 cups of warm water here, which I'm going to pour into the large mixing bowl. I'm going to add our yeast. It's nice and bright and awake. We want to get all of that out of there, all of that good yeast. We're going to put it to work. There we go. Now at this point, I'm going to add 1/3 cup of vegetable oil. Now I have just regular old canola oil. You can use vegetable oil, sunflower oil, olive oil, whatever you have, or you can use the melted margarine or butter. I'm also going to add the 3 teaspoons of salt. This recipe is going to take approximately 6 cups of flour. So I'm going to start adding the flour and mixing it in the mixing bowl. Now I say approximately 6 cups. Bread is partly science and partly something that you feel. And as we go along, you'll see what I mean. So we're going to start by adding, I'm going to use half cup measures. We're going to add 3 to 4 cups of the flour, of the approximately 6 cups that we're going to use. And we're going to just start mixing it in the bowl. There's 1 cup. 2 cups. And 3 cups. So we're going to stop adding right there and we're going to just start mixing. Again, it might look a little messy, but don't let that worry you. Just keep mixing. You can see it's still quite wet, so you know that we're going to need more flour. And we've already added 3 cups. So it's a little bit rough and wet looking. I'm going to go ahead and add the 4th cup. Our grandmothers and great-grandmothers made bread 2-3 times a week, and they never had any of those fancy tools that used electricity. It was just good old elbow grease and a few simple basic shelf ingredients. And there may be a bit of flour in the bottom of your bowl that isn't gathering into the dough, but don't let that worry you. Right about now, we've mixed in 4 cups of flour, and I'm going to take all of this and turn it out onto my cupboard. If you have a tiled cupboard or countertop, you should probably find some kind of a smooth board, cutting board, or a smooth surface to work on so it doesn't get into the grooves and your grout. But I have a smooth countertop, so I'm just using my countertop. So we're going to roll it all out of the bowl. And you can see there's some loose flour there. Don't worry about that. Just scrape the bowl out. Don't worry about washing your bowl yet. We're going to need it, and it doesn't have to be cleaned. I'm just going to set it aside. I'm going to scrape everything I can get off of the spoon. So now you're going to get really friendly with your bread dough. We're going to start working it together. Just gently try and pull it all together. And you're going to feel very quickly that all those loose bits come together, and it's going to start to feel sticky. And when that happens, you know it's time to start adding more flour. Keep in mind, we've added 4 of the approximately 6 cups that this recipe requires. So you can see it's starting to pull together, and it's starting to feel a bit sticky on my hands. So I'm going to take half a cup, and I'm just going to spread it out on my board and on top. This is a nice time to just do some reflective thinking. It's nice little rhythmic work that you do when you're kneading. And this is going to take about 8 to 10 minutes to incorporate the rest of the flour and knead the dough to the consistency that we want. So we just keep kneading, turning. You don't have to be really rough. You don't have to use a lot of force. It's just a nice rhythmic motion. You're getting a bit of a workout, and your bread's getting a bit of a workout. Depending on the humidity in your house and the type of weather we're having, it sometimes changes the amount of flour that we need to use for bread. So our flour takes on different levels of humidity depending on the weather and the humidity level in your house. So when I say approximately 6 cups, that's why I say that. Sometimes you need more, sometimes you don't need that much. So we're at 4.5 cups, and we've been kneading about 2 or 3 minutes. And I'm going to just keep on kneading. Again, to develop the gluten in the bread, we like to knead for about 8 to 10 minutes. Okay, it's starting to feel a little bit sticky. You can see that. So we were up to 4.5 cups. So I'm going to take that other half cup and just set it here and start using it. And I will know then when it's gone, I've used 5 cups of flour. This might be a good opportunity to invite your children to come and help you. Again, make sure that they wash their hands first and that the workspace is safe for them. So I'm adding more of that last half a cup of 5 cups of flour. So when this half cup is empty, I will have used 5 cups. So we're approaching the 8-minute mark of the kneading step of the bread. And you can see it's looking quite lovely. And again, it doesn't look like much, but this is going to turn into 2 loaves that might be a little bit smaller in size, but are about the same weight as a 675 gram loaf of bread that you'd buy at the store. And I think you're going to enjoy it. It's going to taste better, and you'll have the satisfaction of knowing that you made it yourself. All right, so at this point in time, we're going to form the dough into a nice ball. You can see how nice and smooth it looks. You also see, if I press it, it bounces right back. So we're going to check that again after the dough rises, and you'll see the difference. We're going to bring our mixing bowl back, and we're going to pour some oil in here. Now you could also rub it with some margarine or butter if you like. I like to use some vegetable oil. It just is a little bit easier. So I pour that in there. And swirl it around to coat the bowl. You can get in there with your hands too. So we just want to make sure that we have a nice greased surface for that yeast dough to rise in when we set it to rise. So we're going to take our nice little ball of dough, we're going to turn it upside down, and roll it around a little bit so that the surface, the entire surface of that dough is nicely coated and with oil. There we go. That's perfect. Now I'm going to take a clean tea towel and I'm going to cover the bread. You can also use a piece of saran wrap, or you could use a piece of wax paper or parchment paper, whatever you have on hand. So we're going to cover it to keep it nice and warm. And I'm going to put it inside my oven. We want the dough to be rising in a spot that is fairly draft free. So your oven is a good spot. And to give it a little extra warmth, I have turned the light on ahead of time inside my oven. And so we're going to put this dough in here to rise, a nice cozy little spot. So that's going to take about 45 minutes to 1 hour to rise. So you can clean up your work area and go on about your day. Come back in about 45 minutes, and you want to see that the dough has about doubled in size. So picture in your mind what the size of the dough is now and imagine what that might look like if it's doubled. Again, don't be too concerned about being too precise and measuring it. It really is something that you can just eyeball. If we don't go over an hour, we're really not going to cause any harm to the bread dough at this point. So we'll see you back in an hour. Okay, I've cleaned up my work surface. The bread dough is in the oven rising. So now I'm going to butter the loaf pans. So I have that done ahead of time, and I'm not trying to do that at the same time as I'm trying to form the loaf and get them ready to go on their second rise. So I'm going to take out some butter, and I'm just going to grease these pans. Now, if you prefer to use vegetable oil, that's fine. If you prefer to use margarine, that's fine too. I like butter because I think it just adds a little extra flavor to the crust. But again, whatever you have on hand, we don't want anyone stressing about what they might not have. We want you to use whatever you do have on hand. So vegetable oil or whatever kind of cooking oil you have on hand, or margarine or butter. We want to make sure the pans are greased nice and into the corners so that our bread is going to release nicely when it's finished cooking. We do need this done ahead of time because when the dough finishes its first rise, we're going to form the loaves and put them right into the pans, and that's where they'll do the second rise. While we're waiting for that bread dough to rise on its first rise, I just want to recap the simple, basic shelf ingredients that we've used today. So we used 2 cups of warm water, about the temperature of a baby's bath. We used 4.5 teaspoons or 2 packets of dry yeast, whatever type you have. We used a tablespoon of white sugar, 3 teaspoons of salt, 1/3 cup of oil, and approximately 6 cups of flour. So far we've only used about 5 cups, but we are going to use a little bit more when we form the loaves. So as you can see, so far nothing we've done required extravagant equipment from your kitchen. It did not require extravagant ingredients, and it did not require difficult techniques. So far, so good. So in a few minutes, we're going to come back and check that yeast dough after its first rise. Okay, welcome back everyone. It's been about an hour and our bread has risen, our bread dough, and I've pulled our bowl out of the oven, and we're going to see what it looks like right now. And you can see when you poke your finger in, it doesn't bounce back immediately like it did when we first put it in there. That's what you want to see. So right now, we're going to punch the dough down. So what that means is we're going to be releasing the air out of all these bubbles that have developed as the dough was rising. And of course, I have washed my hands again because while the dough was rising, I went on about and did a few other chores. So the dough is punched down in the bowl, and now I'm going to put it out on the counter where I have put some flour. So now our bowl can go out of the way. So we're going to punch that down a little bit. And we're going to eyeball this. I do have my kitchen scale here, but I just want to show you that that really isn't necessary. We're going to eyeball these. There we go. So we're just going to set that one back in the bowl out of the way. A little bit more flour. So if you're going to use it for pizza dough, you would just form your pizza dough and you wouldn't need a second rise. If you're making cinnamon rolls, you'd make it into cinnamon rolls and you would let them rise again in another pan. So we're just going to form this, stretch it out a little bit. So we want to have something that's almost the width of the pan. At this point, we're going to roll it into a nice tight roll. So just start rolling on that short edge. Rolling, rolling. Kind of tuck the ends a little bit if you like. Nicely formed into a loaf. And we're going to tuck those ends in. We're going to pinch up that seam on the bottom. Turn those ends in. Kind of pinch everything together. And there we have a loaf. One loaf ready to go into the pan. So our second loaf is all formed, the ends are tucked in, and it's ready to go in the pan. So here we have 2 loaves in the pans. Don't worry too much if they're not perfectly uniform. They're going to rise nicely and they're going to look lovely. So from here, they're going to go back in the oven, and you can choose to cover them or not. You can sprinkle them with a bit of flour if you like. You could also rub a little bit of oil on the top, or what I'm going to do is just put a little bit of oil over a piece of parchment paper, or wax paper would work. And that's just so as the bread is rising, it is covered for a little extra protection. but it won't stick when it hits the paper. So we're going to go to the oven again, where we still have the light on there for warmth. Pop our pans in there and cover it up. We'll come back in an hour and we'll move on to the baking step. See you soon. So we're back, and our bread dough that we put in the pans has been rising for an hour. So I've gone and I've put my oven on to heat at 375 degrees. When the oven is hot, we're going to put those loaves in the oven. Right now is the time that you need to be careful with your bread. You don't want to be banging it or banging the oven door or having the door open or the window open to create a draft, because it could affect the rise that's already taken place. We're going to take the loaves and we're going to put them right in the center of the oven. The bread should take 25 to 30 minutes depending on your oven. So we'll be back in 25 minutes to take out our lovely loaves of bread. See you soon. Okay, so our timer's gone off. I checked the bread at 25 minutes into the cooking time, and it still looked a little pale. So I added another 5 minutes. So 30 minutes at 375 degrees is what I cooked the bread at today. So you see we have one very beautiful loaf, and we have one that's looking a little more unique, and that's because when I did the pinch didn't hold. So it's really important when you roll your dough when you're putting it in the pan that pinch is really good. But nonetheless, it looks like a delicious loaf of bread, and I can tell you it smells absolutely delicious in here. So we're going to take the bread out of the pans right away, and at this point in time you are able to check the doneness of the bread. So be careful, it's hot. And I'm using the nice clean towel that I used earlier to cover the dough when it was rising. So we're going to let it just slide out of the pan, and when you hit the bottom, you should get a hollow sound on the loaf. You should have a rack. It doesn't have to be a wooden one like this. It can be a regular metal cooling rack, a cookie rack, whatever you have that's going to get the bread up off of the counter and let the air circulate underneath so the bread can cool. So we're just about finished. The only thing I would do at this point in time, other than let it cool, is avoid the temptation to cut into it because it smells so good. But I like to take a little butter and rub the crust. And what that does is it gives you a nice soft crust. If you prefer a little bit of more of a crunchy or a harder crust, just leave it as is. But now is the time to put the butter on, let it soak in. It adds a little bit of flavor as well. So I just give it I'm using this parchment paper that I had out already. And because the bread's hot, that butter is just going to melt right on there. So you see we have a nice golden loaf of bread. So it's very important to let them cool before you cut into them, or the bread will just kind of squish all together. So there we have it. Today we have managed to work our way through making bread. And it may be something that you've never done before. And you might have been a little fearful or anxious to attempt it. But as you can see, it just takes a little bit of time, a little bit of patience, some very simple kitchen tools, and some very basic shelf ingredients. There are many, many, many bread recipes out there. There are a lot of different tools, kitchen tools that you can use to make bread. There's artisanal bread, there's sourdough bread, there's sweet breads, there's breads that use eggs, there's bread recipes that require milk. And those are all going to give you a different bread, a little bit different taste, a little bit different texture. But what I like about the recipe we used today was that it didn't use any of those precious protein items from our pantry and our fridge, those being the eggs and the milk. So today it was just a regular, standard white loaf of bread that is very tasty and an excellent way to feed your family on a budget. I hope you all enjoyed it. I know you're going to want to keep doing this and practicing, and the more you do it, the more you're going to enjoy it and really look forward to baking bread. Hopefully we can do another episode where we take the bread dough and we make some really tasty cinnamon rolls. Until then, I wish you well. Enjoy your bread making.